I am Eric Savinsky,
And I'm Todd Crawford.
and we are too cool for the comic shop. And this time, we might be too cool for the manga shop, even though I don't know if Akira was originally a manga.
I was
But we are here to talk. Oh, it is. It is.
yes.
Thank you, Wikipedia. But we are here to talk specifically about the 1988 film adaptation. Goes along with that.
Yes. Now, for starters, I've not read the manga, but I know some people who have. I believe there's 5 books in it, and the film is adapting only I think like the first, maybe the first two or something, but it's a very small portion of the plot apparently, which I think is an important detail getting into this film, the cryptic nature of it.
That's interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, so I've heard a lot of stuff that happens way after the events of this film, where it's just different than the events of this film. It's very interesting. Some people love it. Some people don't like the differences, who are kind of purists for the film. But I think it works in the film's favor that it is so. Um, it gives it more of a feeling of otherworldliness and like conspiracy. It's almost like a Thomas Pynchon novel, where you feel like there's something higher than you being
Right.
imposed on humanity. And the confusion is a part of the mood, if that makes sense. And I think this film is a tone piece in many ways.
Yes, I like that you said confusion is part of the mood. And a really big distinction between our viewpoints on this film is I have watched it once, and that was about 4 or 5 years ago. And you have watched it a few times.
Yeah, I think I've seen it 5 times now, I'm going to say. It was oddly enough, my friends in college would always watch it anytime there's a party. It always ended with Akira, which I call Akira because the first version of the film I saw, that's how they pronounced it. Later on, I heard it pronounced Akira in the film. So adding the confusion, I don't even know how to say the title of the movie.
I thought it was Akira first, but now I've heard it said as Akira many times, and I don't even know if there is a correct answer. Like maybe it's pronounced differently in sub and dub. I don't know at all.
Yeah, so we're just gonna go with what feels right in this
I mean, I feel like that's a
podcast.
good start. That's a good way to set the tone of the podcast is that we don't even know what the correct pronunciation is. So don't take our words on this film as gospel by any stretch.
No, this is an informal discussion, I would say. We're just talking about our feels on it.
Yeah, exactly. And the movie has left a lot of lasting feels in my body. So it has been successful in that. I'm just going to get it out of the way. I think, and I think I might be wrong. My future self may correct my current self. But I think this movie is a little bit overrated. And I was very open to it and excited about it when I watched it back in college. Because it had really been hyped up to be this anime masterpiece. But since I have seen more anime films, including action films that I hold in higher regard. So, and it sounds like that's potentially your thoughts until later.
Yeah, I mean, I always enjoyed the movie, and I grew up on stuff like Clive Barker and kind of weird fiction, all that splatterpunk and all that. So like the body horror stuff later on in the film, the ethereal like elderly children and all that stuff didn't put me off, but I just didn't have an emotional connection to the film the first time I watched it, and I appreciated it. The animation, everything, which we'll have to get into later, of course, I respected, but I just never got it like my friends did, who were like, "Oh my god, we have to watch this every other week or whatever. This is the best thing ever made." I liked it, but very casually for a very long time.
Right. And I can kind of agree on that one. There were some like moments in the film that I was kind of like starstruck or like kind of not necessarily horrified, but kind of like, existentially perturbed might be the right way to say it. But I wasn't really emotionally connected to the characters specifically.
I think a big part of that, especially for me, is I feel like it's hard to be the first time you watch the film because the real humanity of the characters is revealed kind of at the end. Like I'd say you're supposed to follow this protagonist. They're not horrible. You could tell they're products of their environment, this post-apocalyptic world. But the flashbacks at the end showing Akira and Canada's relationship, as children and looking after, I believe it was Akira looking after Canada and protecting them from bullies and stuff. That's really when you get the strongest bond of the characters and kind of get them. So I think on the
Right.
first watch, you don't miss that, but you don't have that context the whole way through the film.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting way to leave that, which is essentially backstory, for the climax of the film, which is kind of what it does. And I looked into the manga adaptation, but here, since you mentioned it, and it seems just like so many things like that, like the climax of the movie, are all just really slightly different and or spread out over 6 volumes of an anime or of a manga. I mean, so it's just it sounds like a very different story, honestly, fundamentally.
Yeah, that's what I always hear. One thing I want to get into, since we're talking about characters already, it's very interesting how the characters are portrayed in the film because you have two sets of characters. You have like we'll call them the adults, like the people in the government. I believe there's a reporter, a scientist, and then you have a group of rebel teens who get swept up into this governmental conspiracy with alien kind of creatures and this weird godlike DNA.
Right.
And it's very interesting because it's like a motorcycle gang, and a big part of the early half of the film is them getting into scrimmages with the rival gangs and all that, and trying to hurt each other. And you're shown this world. Is it Neo Tokyo? I believe it takes place in.
Yes.
And you just see how it's ravaged society. You see their school is all broken down. There's no respect for authority. There's constant protests that turn extremely violent with grenades and stuff.
Yeah. No, it's very much split in between the two worlds of youth and adults, which is really kind of the angst, the heart of the whole movie, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like when you're a teenager, you have these strong opinions on things, but you don't quite understand them. And
Right.
it's that rebellious spirit, and then you get in over your head, and it's like, oh my god, this is actual life or death. This isn't just a punk song or something.
Right. So there's that motif to it, but there's also you know, they live in a post-apocalyptic world about 30 years after a nuclear disaster. Also, Neo Tokyo is in 2019, so we're just a year after Neo Tokyo was founded. How lucky. But you really understand through the setting and the animation very well that adults, really fucked up this world. The kids are just kind of living it, like you said, they're products of their environment.
Exactly, and that's a big point, and that's kind of the final reveal that we were already discussing, is that the kids are victims, and it's interesting how the further the film goes on, the more you see their innocence and humanity come out as they go to protect each other. My favorite scene in the film, I think it's pretty much everybody's, is when one character passes away in the gang. So one of the other characters takes his motorbike and drives it into the wall, and it blows up. And he says something like, "There, now I'll have something to ride in hell." And it's this like Viking type commitment and culture, but with motorcycles, and it's just so badass.
Yeah, no, it's definitely got that tone down. It's confusion and badassery. I feel like the film is kind of split into those parts, and then they kind of like combine in the finale, where it's tons of action, but it's also bizarre, body horror esque, all that kinds of stuff. So normally with movies we go, plot point by plot point. But honestly, I don't have that clear of a memory to do so. So I'm not sure if you do. But
Yeah,
however
I
we want to
actually
tackle it,
do. I don't feel it's a
we
total plot movie in that way, though. I think that watching it for the story
right,
is, and it does have a story. I mean, it's a clear structure. It's told linearly mostly. But I don't think you watch it for the plot, to be completely honest. I think you do watch it for the animation, for the music. I mean, the soundtrack's one of the most iconic in all of film. It has arguably the best animation, just in anime in general. I mean, it's definitely in the contending for the best. I don't watch that much, but I would say between this and Neon Genesis Evangelion, End of Evangelion, are probably the two most impressive that I've personally seen.
Yeah, they're definitely products of that 80s, 90s kind of it's like, we have our classic action and our blockbusters and person filming from the 80s. It's kind of like how I feel about Akira. Is like that style of anime is not gone really, but it's not like the go-to style anymore. Things are usually more bright and more glossy in anime these days. So I feel like it's just got that sense of grit that you don't see too much in anime even more. Like I'm thinking about even even post-apocalyptic dystopian anime like Psychopass that I've watched. That's a very clean, glossy show, but it's got similar themes. So really, like nothing seems to have the same grit than those like classic anime movies and TV shows.
No, and I think one reason for, and this is one thing that put me off watching the film at first, was so you have this really elaborate, complex like lighting cells and all that stuff, and just like looking at behind the scenes of the film and how it was animated is just it's just breathtaking. But then you have the protagonist, and like in my opinion, their drawings are all kind of crude and erudite compared to the rest of the landscapes and everything. It's like,
Like of like the characters themselves.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can kind of agree with that. I think I think it's purposeful, because there's such facial expression when any of the characters, including the espers, like the elderly children and stuff, go through pain or shock or turmoil or something. Like they really do get that across, and I think their ugliness, their like lack of appeal aesthetically, kind of works into that.
Exactly. And I think so much of it is trying to almost challenge you, where it makes you not want to follow these characters immediately. And the further that you do, the more you realize, like, oh, I judge these kids based on these superficial things or their immediate actions that we see. But then you get to know them and you realize that that's kind of a big issue in society that's kind of commenting on. For instance, with the different gangs, them all fighting with each other, they're all products of the same, collapsed society, but they're fighting each
Right.
other.
Exactly.
One thing I want to discuss is that, and this is one of the things that really puts me off from rewatching the film more often, ironically, is it has one of the cruelest deaths, I think, in all of film. Definitely top 3 or 4 for me. In
Oh,
which
is it the same one that I think is?
it probably is with Akira's girlfriend. She's like the sweetest, nicest girl, and
Yeah.
he's kind of like abusive towards her, and she's just so loyal to him. And there's a scene where once he transforms, it's funny, they actually parody this in South Park in one of the earlier seasons. They combine this with like 2001: A Space Odyssey with Cartman getting larger and larger, the Trapper Keeper episode. But he turns out like a giant baby that's just like I don't even know how to describe it exactly. Just a big gross monster. And his girlfriend gets sucked up into the rules of fat, and just you just hear her screaming that she's dying. You just hear like her getting crushed slowly.
I'm really glad that you brought it up, that it's the exact thing that you wanted to talk about. Because not gonna lie, her death, Kaori's death, that's her character's name,
Oh, thank you.
probably is what sticks with me most 5 years later. Honestly, that like the existential dread of everything surrounding that, like their relationship of like you being so lost in your rage and lack of control that you like gruesomely kill your loyal loved one, and just the way that it happens really fucks me up. So like once that happens in the movie, I'm pretty much like checked out, and like I know like the whole universe gets like kind of fucked up and all that shit afterwards. But once that happens, I was like, all right, I just feel very sad and disturbed now.
It's nauseating.
Right. Well, it happens in like her death happens in like 5 seconds, and then like it's never even, it doesn't matter. Like it's not, that's the really disturbing part, is like there's no one like upset over it, and there's, because bigger things are happening literally, that the singularity is being created and everything's getting destroyed. So like her death is just like kind of a blip, and I think that's like kind of the agonizing part about it, is like you're so used to death in fiction being like this powerful moment that the craft really stays on, and it just kind of fucking happens and then it's over, and it just bothers me.
Yeah, I think it really put me up the first time I watched. Like I understood it, but it's just so effective that it's just like it's just such a small scene, but it's just so powerful. It's just too much. I'm not criticizing for that. I praise it for that. Um,
Right, exactly.
but
No,
as a
it's
viewer, it fucks you up.
that's the one moment where it's like super emotionally effective, and I'm just like, oh, cool.
Yeah, and you still have like I don't know, probably like 20 minutes left or something like that.
Yeah, or at least it feels like it. Yeah, I mean, time gets warped when you watch this movie too. It's over 2 hours. It's almost like there's a lot going on, but there's really not at the same time. Like if you would chop up the plot into like 5 sentences, like you could pretty much accurately describe the whole movie, I think.
Exactly. And I think that's one of its strengths too. Is it's a very complex film in many ways, but yet also very simplistic. Because I think if it's just complexity upon complexity, it wouldn't be such an enjoyable film. But it really manages to balance that pop art appeal, where you're impressed by it, but you're
Right.
entertained by it at the same time.
Exactly, and I think that's part of where it lost me at the same time because I kind of expected, I'm not sure what I expected, but kind of what you get is you get like you get a straightforward package of action with complex layered emotional themes, whereas you don't get like a complex story with like interwoven like sci-fi intrigue, or that might be what I was expecting, and that's not this movie at all. This is like no Inception. This is no Ghost in the Shell even. It's simpler in that regard.
Yeah, it's like there's a lot of tiny components that make it up. Like a ton of when you break it down, there's a ton of characters between the children and adults. A lot of
Mhm.
side characters, a lot of little subplots that have big payoffs at the end. It's like it's overwhelming in so many ways, and that's why I think that you almost need that simple, general plot to carry it through because it's like a pop song. I say like with Prince, for instance. Like if you break a Prince song down, they're incredibly dense. If you look at the vocal layers alone for his own vocals, there's like over a dozen vocal tracks playing on every one of his songs. Let alone before you get into the instruments, that's more layers than some rock songs have.
Right.
But it's a pop song and it keeps that general simple pop structure and appeal. And I think that's very much how Akira plays out.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to describe it. So what was like your emotional resonance with it on your first viewing? Was it mostly just, you know, external kind of appreciation for it, or did it kind of get you existential like dread? Because it's kind of what it gave me, and that's kind of probably why I haven't revisited it yet.
I think a lot of for me, and keep in mind, I watched this at like 2 or 3 in the morning in a room full of like dudes that were like passed out or just really drunk. And so like it's not like the kind of place you watch the movie in. You know what I mean? It's not like Animal
Right.
House or something.
Yeah,
So
I feel like the ideal atmosphere to watch Akira probably is at 3 in the morning, but completely alone.
yeah, so I was really fucking tired and out of it. So I was kind of like in and out of sleep watching it. So it was just like a fever dream, you know,
I
which
mean,
is interesting.
that's probably a good first experience because it certainly left an impression on you, just like the imagery and like the tone and the feels.
Yeah, exactly. And then I saw it in full, and it was more like, let's see what everybody's talking about. Okay, that was cool. I like that. I get why people like that. It was kind of just more like superficial, like, oh, I watched this movie. That's another one on my IMDb. You know,
Right.
um, I didn't put too much thought into it, honestly. Like, I liked it, but it's almost like I heard so much about it that I didn't want to put more effort into it, if that makes sense, because the hype just kind of killed the interest.
Yeah, and so I think that was probably kind of where we were both at. I watched it alone on like a college Sunday by myself, but regardless of our like, you know, circumstances seeing it, it sounds like we were both kind of you know, it's really hard when something gets hyped up that much. I think I think other anime, you know, few of them, but a select few really suffer from that problem where everybody heralds it as a masterpiece, and then you watch it and it's so complicated that your initial reaction to it like can't really meet that hype level.
It's almost like you have your guard up for the film, which is weird because it should be like you're more excited for it, but when it gets hyped to oblivion, it's like you're disappointed if it's not a 20 out of 10. You know, and most great
Yeah.
films are not 10s out of 10. So like
Right.
it's almost like this the bar set so high that if it isn't that personal like thing that just immediately resonates and connects with you on every level, you're kind of like, well, I don't know, it wasn't the best thing ever. I mean, yeah, it was really good, but rather than just saying, oh, that was a really good movie.
Exactly. Exactly. Let's
And
see.
yeah, no,
I
oh sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, a big thing that got me rewatching it, you know, it's always one that like I enjoy, but I never really thought I'd rewatch. Oddly enough, I was like, okay, I saw that once, I got everything I need from it. You know, I'm not going to school for animation or anything. I appreciate it, but I don't need to study it. You know, got it. But it was always kind of my radar because of one of my favorites, Kanye West. That's his favorite film. But I just saw a thing on Facebook, just in my timeline. Someone shared a picture of how they animated it, and I just started to think about it. And I started listening to the soundtrack sometimes, just you know, around the house. And I just decided one weekend, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go back and rewatch this. And then after having seen it like 3 or 4 times already, I just sat down, I just watched it in broad daylight, and I finally had that connection that everybody else has with it.
Right. I actually was pretty harsh first reviewed the film because I was reviewing films on Letterboxd even 4 years ago. So it was 2016. So I'm gonna read a little snippet from my Letterboxd review. And again, I might change my opinion upon a rewatch, but here's what I had to say. Um, Akira likes to pretend it's profound, but leaving off of ambiguity does not automatically redeem what I found to be a cast of characters I did not care for in a war-torn Neo Tokyo, with an obvious anti-violence message leading into inconsequential allegoric destruction. That basically went on to say that if you're into the history of anime, you should watch it, and it was fun 80s action.
It's interesting, just because I just don't know if that's like there is a political message and all that, and especially like Eastern cinema, I kind of just take it for granted, to be honest. Kind of like Godzilla, and how that's an allegory for the bomb and everything. Um,
Right.
so I just see it as such a cultural thing that I almost overlook it in these films, if that makes sense. But
Yeah, I mean, I think it, you know, maybe upon first watch, it's most obvious. At least it was for me. Or maybe that was the thing that seemed the most obvious. Because it's funny that my review, I talked about the anti-violence being like kind of like the main moral. Um, but, you know, thinking about it years later, all I'm left with are the kind of, you know, angsty existential feels that it gave me, and like kind of the gruesome reality of it, which I guess kind of, you know, that kind of breeds into the anti-violence story. I mean, this is a land subject to nuclear destruction and the consequences of it, and then everybody tries to solve every problem in this movie with violence, honestly, of some kind. You know, the main characters, the adults, the government, really that's basically everybody's option. And I think towards the end of the movie, you know, they're sending the tanks out and the soldiers out to try to stop Tetsuo, and obviously that doesn't make things any better.
oh, that's
So I
so
think
funny.
that's like
I accidentally
right.
been referring to Tetsuo as Akira this whole time.
Yeah, I knew what you meant, but I didn't want to correct you in case I was wrong. But yeah, you know, Tetsuo like kind of becomes Akira at the end. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, I don't quite get it, but the movie's over at that point, so you know.
Right. Yeah, see, that's part of the sometimes I feel like endings can be too ambiguous, and well, at the end of Akira, and you've watched it multiple times, and like
Yeah.
I don't know, like usually like it when a film gives me like two or three interpretations of the ending, and then Akira I feel like has like 20. And
Yeah, I feel like I always say like the end of Akira is like it goes into like the 2001 light montage, and then you have was it isn't the final line like I am Akira, and then it goes in the credits. I believe it's something like
yeah,
that.
something like that.
Yeah, so I guess how I felt was like the whole film building up, of course, to this big thing, basically a bomb going off allegorically, so that then when it
Right.
happens, you're not going to understand it when it happens, and that's a big part of the film that on an existential level I do resonate with. It's this feeling of just powerlessness to war and all that, and really all that these people could do is vent out their frustrations through harming each other, other helpless people, really, and just making it worse. And
Exactly.
so I feel like the end for me, at least on an emotional level, is the fact that like you don't have to understand it because it just happens to you. You know, it's almost like the film
That
itself ends upon a random act of violence towards you,
no,
the
in
viewer.
terms of fourth wall breaking, that makes a lot of sense. The characters are helpless to the consequences of the world, and you as a viewer are helpless to never fully understand the movie.
And I also always think like it probably gets answered a little more in the manga, I would imagine.
Well, the manga doesn't even. I read through a brief synopsis of the last volume of the manga. That manga doesn't even like end the same way. Um, like part of the ending of the movie is like in the middle of the manga, and it's kind of like again, it's a different story. I feel like the manga is actually less confusing,
Yeah, it definitely could be. It's definitely
but again, haven't read it.
there's one movie. It was the director. I think Richard Kelly's his name. He's the director of Donnie Darko, and what that Southland Tales. It's a major flaw. Everybody hated it, but it's like to understand the movie, you have to like read like there's like five graphic novel prequels or some shit, and it takes place after the fifth, between the sixth and seventh, or something so weird like that.
What the hell?
And yeah, and same with Donnie Darko. It's funny because like that was like edited to shit, and everybody thought it was like a masterpiece and brilliant. But it turns out when the director's cut came out, it was really stupid. Originally, like what was supposed to happen was all really lame. So, so it's better like when it was ambiguous and seemed to like your imagination was much better than the actual solution that was originally intended to be in the film.
Right, right.
I'm not comparing
I
Akira
mean,
to that, but it's just got me thinking about those kind of things.
no, it's a one-to-one comparison. Let's be honest.
I think in the sense that like I've always felt like if I read the manga, I would understand it.
Potentially, or you could be more confused. I don't know. Uh, there's another part of it, that it's an adaptation, Akira, and this other example that you're talking about with Southland Tales is kind of like a continuity. So this is, basically different things.
Yeah, no, that's very true. No, I honestly I feel like I understand Akira, even though I don't know any of the characters' names and all
Yeah,
that.
right.
Um, aside from things like characters, plot points, story, themes, and cast, I feel like generally I get the message of it. I get the themes. I definitely don't feel like I'm watching. Like I have no idea what's going on here. I definitely
Yeah,
because I do think at the end of the day it's a very emotional, almost spiritual journey that you're expected to go on. Really, is it's very much like very harsh industrial, almost not quite industrial like, but post-apocalyptic, and then you get taken into something much bigger, just like the characters are. You know what I mean? And something more spiritual and ethereal and just alien, just foreign. And I think really that's
definitely.
what you need for the film. Ironically, I don't think one of my favorite directors, David Lynch. I didn't like his films when I first saw them because I thought they were like pretentious and pseudo intellectual. And then it hit me that these films aren't so trying to be intellectual; they're trying to be emotional, and it's just pure emotional cinema. And oddly enough, that's kind of how I feel about Akira now too. Is that I don't know that it's something you think about. I think it's something you just feel, which might sound even more pretentious than some cryptic message.
Right. But I think you're right. I think you're right because, like you said, it doesn't have like a complex interweaving plot. It's very much about the emotional ramifications of the setting and character decisions. But yeah, I mean, it's ambiguous even reading the synopsis of it. Also, I also think it's kind of odd. I guess maybe you could say Canada is the main character, probably butchering that. Um, he basically goes through the same thing that Tetsuo's girlfriend goes through, Kaori. But he doesn't get crushed to death. Instead, he gets transported to, and I'm quoting here, another dimension. And, that flashback happens with them as children. And then the Espers, wrinkly children, return Canada to the real world. So he's just fine, I guess, for reasons. And then tell him that Akira will take Tetsuo to safety. And then at the end of the movie, when things settle down, Tetsuo introduces himself at another unspecified level of existence. Unspecified level of existence. That's what we're left with. That's Wikipedia quoted right there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think on like a basic like hero's journey kind of narrative, it does work, especially for like Tetsuo, who it's like he wants to be something bigger. He's lost in the world, and at the end, he achieves that. He achieves this weird godhood, transcendence. But it's just so much different and so transformative beyond any human idea of that. It's almost like Hellraiser, where these
Right.
these weird metaphysical creatures that are supposed to bring pleasure, but the Cenobites, what are the creatures in Hellraiser, their idea of pleasure is what we would define as pain, essentially. It's just a total different plane of senses and sensuality, and I think very much so it's kind of the functionality, the weird philosophical construct of the metaphysics of Akira, is that it's just kind of beyond the character's human understanding of something bigger than them.
Right. I think it works out well, emotionally.
Kind of
Um,
like
you know,
you have seen Princess Mononoke, right?
yes.
Yeah, like I always kind of think like similarly, I get the same vibes from the forest god in that, the weird fucking deer thing.
Yes, that kind of blows up, but then it's fine later.
Yeah, it's like, oh, it's this great majestic god of the forest, and then you see it like, what the fuck is it? If I was camping and I saw that thing, I would shit my pants and then I would die.
Right. I would still rather see that than a mass of pulsating baby flesh that, you know, absolute power will corrupt you as.
Yeah, it's a tough call, but I'd rather go with the weird deer face thing.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have to talk about some Studio Ghibli movies perhaps in the next episode or just sometime in the future because those usually elicit strong emotional reactions from me, but it's usually not complete existential confusion. It's usually just tears. So I can at least understand tears better.
Yeah, that's one reason that Kiki's Delivery Service is my favorite Ghibli because it's just for the most part it's a very just happy, pleasant film.
Until the existential crisis.
Yeah, when those that stupid bitch doesn't want her grandma's cake that she baked her for her birthday, she has to go and ruin everything in the whole movie with one of the saddest
Right.
scenes in cinema. Other than that, though, it's a really happy, fun movie.
Exactly. Well, do you have anything else to say about Akira? I know we're coming in at way short as far as too cool standards go, but we also did a 3 hour plus podcast last episode that, for those of you guys listening, is split into two parts for Uncharted, so you can enjoy that for a long time.
Exactly, that was like a 2-in-1 episode as far as I'm concerned. So
Was it was a lot of games, and when you're talking about gameplay and story and all that stuff, it's 4 installments no less. And then we in the next episode we talk about one movie that I've seen 4 years ago. There's less.
exactly, and the thing is too with the Uncharted reviews is that we didn't just review them, like we gave the best reviews out there. Like the other reviews don't they should basically get purged. YouTube may as well just delete them because they're worthless
Really,
now. Now that we released our
I
video.
agree. You need to come for the in-depth discussions.
No, the thing with Akira on a final note is that it's similar to the actual character in the film or the force in the film. Really, it's large. It's bigger than me. It's like if I was gonna say like about a Beatles song, it's like, well, really, like the bass line kind of sucks. You know what I mean? It's impossible, really, to criticize. It's almost impossible to talk about because there's always going to be somebody smarter than me saying better and more interesting things about the film than me. I know a handful of people in my personal life who knows a million times more than I ever will about this film. But it's one that I think
Right.
find interesting and enjoyable, and I thought would be fun to talk about.
Exactly. It's one of those things that I don't even know if I'm a fan of it. I've seen it and I like it, and it's something that, you know, I can just kind of relax with and talk about casually, and I don't have to be the expert on it, like say Star Wars or video game topics and things like that.
My best comparison, and I think this is a very good comparison for considering it past episodes, is I think that it's the Blade Runner of anime.
Yeah, I think that is pretty accurate. I feel like it's a little bit even more confusing than Blade Runner, but I think anime to general audiences is just more confusing than normal movies, so that works out.
Yep. So, do you want to go ahead and give this a rating?
Yeah, I think I had only rated it a 3 out of 5 stars when I originally watched it, but obviously it left a lasting impact on me. I've thought about it from time to time, for years afterwards. So I think on sheer, emotional impact and legacy alone, I'd probably give it like an 8 out of 10. And it's really hard to nail my feelings down on this movie. Like you, I would probably have to watch it a couple more times, at least one more time, and get Colton into watching it since he likes anime, and I don't think he's seen it. But I would give it a solid 8.
I definitely think that's what I would have given it. I think it is what I gave it when I first watched the film. And it's tough because I always felt like for me it was an 8, but it was quote unquote objectively a 10. I can now say for me it's just a 10. I feel like it would be harsh to give it anything less than that, and I feel like almost unfit to do so. For it'd be like, well, Jesus Christ, he's like a 9 out of 10 prophet. He's pretty good, but you could do, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does exactly what it wants to do and accomplish as a movie. I just, I don't know what I would do differently. I think it's that uncertainty of if, that's uncertainty as a critic of like, I don't know if this could be better or worse or what, and I
I
don't know
don't know
how
what
that
the
would be
fuck this
done.
is.
Right. So that's why I'm like in a safe, above average rating zone, but not perfect, just in case I think I'm a dumbass later.
Yeah, that's cool, and that's a tough thing with these kind of things. Like I said, is that I think it's totally fair. Like if someone wants to give it a 3 out of 5 or an 8 out of 10 or whatever, like I'm not saying there shouldn't be a wealth of opinions because that is necessary. You should always have someone who hates the classics to challenge why we value them
Right.
so much. Like if somebody hates Indiana Jones and want to talk to me about it, I would love to hear them out. And same to this movie, of course. With that said, um, for me, it actually is a 10, and I say that wholeheartedly. Um, just as of my most recent viewing, but damn, I
No,
had a
I'm
thought, and I just totally lost it.
See, that's exactly how Akira goes. You had a thought and you lost it.
Oh, I remember it now. My thoughts on Akira are like you've seen 2001, right?
Yes, and
Okay.
we'll have to talk about that someday too.
Oh, I'd love to. I'm not smart enough to talk about it, but it's one of my favorites. Um,
Perfect. So we'll disagree then. I love it.
so I feel like the apes at the beginning of 2001, when the monolith shows up, that's basically how I feel when the movie's on. Is that it's the black monolith over me, and I'm just an ape.
Right. Yeah, I know. I can see that because I mean, it's just one of those. I feel like I'm pretty good at like deciphering movies and shit. Like some of my favorite movies, I consider pretty complicated, but I this is just one of them, man. That I don't know if I'll ever fully crack that nut. That monolith is too big.
There's always a bigger fish.
There is. Well, on that intellectual note from the Phantom Menace, what 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 better way to end our talks on Akira? If people are listening, please share your comments below because I'm interested in hearing what other people think about this movie because it seems like criticism online of the film just varies literally across the board, just everywhere. There's strong middle of the road opinions. There's strong praise. There's strong dislike. I think a movie is doing its job right when it's actually getting a variety of opinions from an audience.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely. I don't always side with that in terms of like, there's a lot of films that I hate that some people love and are divisive, and I don't think just
Right.
because they're divisive that means they're good. With that said, it's always more interesting. They're always more fun to talk about.
Right. Exactly. And I think this was one of those movies. But I'm gonna go rewatch on YouTube Kaori's death so I can just have nightmares tonight.
Yeah, and I'm going to just go to sleep.
I should be going to sleep. And with that, I'll let you close it out.
I'm Todd Crawford,
And I'm Eric Savinsky.
and we are too cool for the comic shop.